So any moment now, President Trump will be making his way to Alaska for that high-stakes summit, about 8-hour flight with Russian President Putin in an effort to secure a ceasefire and long-term peace deal with Ukraine. European leaders are praising the president ahead of the meeting for pledging U.S. military support for a, quote, reassurance force that would police any deal. Here to react, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. Ambassador, first off, reassurance force. That means the tripwire should they try to invade down the line if we get to the point where we have a ceasefire, right?
That's right. And I prefer to call it a deterrence force. The Europeans are calling it a reassurance force. But the idea is if you get a ceasefire, the next step is to make sure that Putin doesn't just build up and attack again. And so having European forces there, helping them train and equip Ukrainians, help support air defense, this is going to make it harder for Putin to attack a second time.
So, you see the agenda. I mean, they're going to immediately meet, then they're going to have a working breakfast, and at some point they're going to have a dual press conference. That doesn't sound like an agenda that could break up abruptly, which I think the president would do if Putin stays with his maximalist demands. But you, I understand, you told our producer, you expect him to stay with his maximalist demands.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Putin will not give an inch in reality. He may try to do a little smoke and mirrors. He may say, well, we could do a ceasefire, but certain conditions have to be met, and then get Trump and the U.S. to then start saying, oh, what are those conditions, and what do we have to do? Where do we go? So Putin tries to steer the conversation away from the obvious point of stopping the war, which is what Trump has been pushing all along.
So when the president meets with the North Korean leader, he says, look, you get rid of your nukes. I'm going to show you how great your oceanfront property will be and how valuable it'll be. He didn't go for it. So the president, I thought, would show up with his economic team and say, look at how I can help stand up your economy. But it's Putin that's showing up with his economic team, which maybe it's the optimist. I think that shows that he wants to get back online, and he knows after the war, he's got an economy in ruins, and he wants the U.S. to help stand it up again.
Yeah, Brian, I don't look at it that way. I think that he may be looking forward to a day when sanctions are lifted and business as usual, and he's not a global pariah. But he's not going to give anything up for that unless he has to. I think the reason he's bringing that business side is to dangle that in front of President Trump and say, look at all the business we could be doing. He knows Trump is motivated by doing good deals. And so that's what Putin is trying to do to influence Trump.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. But I think it was Trump trying to pitch him on trade as almost a leverage. But the ambassador, from your sources, how much does Russia need a deal? Being that their economy's being hollowed out, inflation's in double digits, they really having trouble drafting anyone. North Koreans are working in their factories. Isn't that part of the reason he went up to Steve Witkoff and said, I'd like to meet with the president?
Well, I think that he was concerned the U.S. was going to go down this road of very severe consequences, so he wanted to derail that by offering a meeting and dangling the possibility of a three-way meeting with Zelensky as well. But there's a difference between Russia and Putin. Any normal leader with an economy like Russia's would be putting on the emergency brakes. Putin, on the other hand, is motivated by imperial glory. He wants to be the guy that rebuilds the Russian Empire, so he's going to push this as far as he can. My guess is it's going to be later this year when even Putin realizes the economy can't take it anymore.
Ambassador, I want you to hear what the UK Prime Minister said. He said, I've said personally to President Trump for the last 3.5 years the conflict has been going on. We haven't gotten anywhere near a prospect of actually a viable solution, a viable way of bringing it to a ceasefire. And now we do have that chance because of the work that he has done and put in. One thing that Putin does is put in the work. And one of the things it turns out, whether it's Madeleine Albright, President Bush, or Angela Merkel, he's going to have his profile on Trump. How does he play Trump? And don't you think Trump is smart enough to know when he's being played?
Well, I do think the president is smart enough to know when he's being played, and he's playing his own side. He is trying to do tactics to see if he can keep Putin engaged and stir the pot enough, get everybody talking so that he can get something done. But Putin, I think, is trying to manipulate Trump by dangling things in the future and steering the topic away from the topic at hand. He wants to talk about arms control. He wants to talk about new business deals. He wants to talk about rare earth minerals. He wants to talk about real estate. He's going to try to steer the conversation into a lot of areas that he thinks Trump would be interested in, so that he doesn't get pinned down on actually stopping the war.
So, Ambassador, if the president's watching right now, what advice would you give?
I would say that, first off, keep doing what you're doing. Keep stirring the pot. Keep getting everybody talking. But insist on a ceasefire first. Then we can talk about other things. But ceasefire first. Stop the killing. And then second, there's a big difference between stopping the war where it is, and Russia occupies part of Ukraine, and we all understand that, versus recognizing it as legitimately Russian territory. It's not. This is a war of imperial aggression, and if we recognize that as Russian, we are opening the door to more war.
Right. The Iranians still think they were waiting for that 6th round of talks, and they found out the president does have a threshold when he just says enough. Ambassador, thanks so much.
That's right.
Great perspective.
Brian, thanks.
Appreciate it.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.